Hello, everybody, and welcome to Azumi Devlog, Season 2, Week 4. I skipped last week because I was doing, actual real programming stuff, and it didn't even touch the game, so didn't update because there was nothing to talk about. This is probably going to be one of the most long or complicated updates because there was a big thing that happened that I need to explain because I'm really proud of it. And so, of course, the one that requires the most explanation and talking and thought process, I already recorded once and it didn't pick up my audio, so I have to do it again. So, technology is an asshole. So there's two major things that I did this week. One is that I finally added some the lingering visual effects and added some sounds to things that didn't have sounds. And the other thing is I finished the dialogue system, and it took a lot of work, a little bit of ingenuity. I'm pretty happy with how the dialogue system in particular came out. So we're going to take a look at that. And yeah, hopefully you'll get something from this, I suppose. So let's start with the visuals and the sound stuff. Open this up. So one of the things I added right off the bat is I changed the sound for the jump and added the clouds. The jumping and landing clouds have just been like yellow boxes for the last little while. You can see. So one coming up and two coming down, and the jump is a little bit more normal. I also added a sound effect for the sigil. It makes its own little sound when it comes out. Before it didn't make any noise at all, which is nice. I also changed the effects for the smoke on the ground, little dust particles you kick up to be more in line with the smoke and dust from the jumps. Let's see, what else? The pinwheel has a sound effect now, which I think is pretty nice. The kick has both a attack and land sound effect, which is cool. And then the one that came out really nice, I think, is the stinger, the charge attack. Kind of like, made it sound like a thunderbolt or something, which is pretty cool. Now, I'm not 100% sold on these sound effects, and the reason I'm not is that the application I'm using right here, what is it? What's it called? Fucking BFXR. It's usually used for game jams and stuff. It's like really quick to make like 8-bit sounding sound effects really quickly. And that's the problem. This is a 16-bit game. This is a Sega Mega Drive, Sega Genesis style video game. So the sounds don't exactly sound authentic to the aesthetic we're trying to create here. So I'm considering maybe like downloading LMMS, which is a open source digital audio workstation, getting an OPN2 or a Yamaha YM2612, which is the Sega Genesis sound chip, like a VST for that, and seeing if I can create more authentic sounds, even though I know nothing about audio engineering, so I don't know if I'll be biting off way more than I can chew with my current retarded knowledge. But I'll look into that next week and we'll see what happens with that. Alright, the other thing is the dialogue system. And this is going to take a little bit of talking to because it's kind of a mind bender. It took a lot of doing. And 2 weeks ago I started it. And the reason I didn't do anything last week and went to programming and started to look at more traditional programming stuff is I thought this was impossible to do in Construct 3 the way I wanted to. But I got bored on Monday. I came back here and I figured it out. I'm proud of this because there was no tutorial guiding me. There was no any of that shit. It was just raw willpower and determination and just pouring through the documentation of Construct 3 and trying to piece together a way to do what I wanted to do conceptually. And I figured out a workaround and it's pretty dope. So I'm going to the dialogue events here. This is the dialogue system. It's dynamic, so you can use this exact same dialogue system for any dialogue in the game at all. It all runs through here, and it can handle anything, at least anything that I've been able to conceive so far. And the reason is that it uses a 3D array to hold all the text that you will need in the game, and it dynamically calls it with a function, or a series of functions. One of the things I was having a lot of problems with, and the reason I decided to look at other programming stuff last week in general, is that Construct 3 doesn't have a traditional, what's it called? Delta runtime thing. I don't know the exact word for it. If you know programming, you'll understand what I'm talking about. It uses event sheets. So the event sheets always run chronologically every tick. So certain things with these arrows are like triggered events. And so those triggered events are basically always looking for that specific trigger, like button inputs or like certain things to finish. And you can't put those in functions because the functions run chronologically, or they run when they're called. They're not running in delta or in process delta, so they're not constantly checking. You can't just throw a function and construct into process delta or DT and wait and like hope have it constantly check. It just doesn't work like that for whatever reason. So the functions were kind of limited in that sense, and I needed to try and figure out a way around it, and I did. So what it does is that when you call this function right here, dialog setup, it has two parameters. It has cutscene input and lines input. And normally in a function, parameters like this, when you call them, they only live inside the function. So as soon as the function finishes, these parameters are discarded because they're no longer needed. But because I can't contain this entire dialog system in a function, because of the way construct 3 works, I needed a way to be able to call these values and then keep them around after this function finishes so I can continue to use them in other things. So what I did is I have these parameters from the function be immediately stored as global variables inside this event sheet so they can be called by other things in the event sheet besides the function itself. And this was the beginning of the workaround to allow this to actually, well, no pun intended, function. So what these refer to, cutscene input and lines input, are the cutscene and the amount of lines in that cutscene. And these are both values in an array. So if we go over here, we go back to this, we have an array, a 2x3 array. So each column vertically is its own cutscene. At least that's how I'm planning on this function to work. So 0 going down, that's all the dialogue for one cutscene. You can see this cutscene here has 3 lines in the test that I have set up. The second one has 2. So that's the first parameter. It determines which one of these columns to use in the cutscene, what text to pull. And then the second number, or amount of lines, right? What was it called? It checks how many of these columns, or how many rows in these columns are full of values. So it stores that as a number. So for this one, it would be 3. This one, it would be 2. So if I wanted to use this first cutscene, I would call the function, and I would call 0, 3. First, or 2, technically, because you're using a 0-based system. So column 0 has total of 3, or 0-based function, 2 lines. So if we go back here, the dialog events, cutscene input would be 0, lines input would be 2. So it pulls down the window that hold all the text and stuff, and then it takes those 2 numbers that are just alive in this function and makes them global variables, so then we call by everything else after it. And then you set the current line, which is another global variable, to 0. And current line represents the line of dialogue you're on in that column. So it keeps track of where you are in the sequence of that cutscene. So once this tween is finished, once the window's pulled down, it starts the second function called line read. And on line read, it just takes the value in that array. So see, it says cutscene number, cutscene line, which are these global functions which were called from the or the global variables that were called from the function, and it sets the text in the text box to that value. So if we were going to do 0 current line, which is 0, right? The current line is 0, and the current cutscene is 0. You go back here, 0, 0 is this first text. So it's basically calling 0, 0. Have the text box say this. And that's what it does. I keep clicking the wrong event sheet. So it does that. And these down here are functions that just control how the text works. There's a function in construct for typewriter text that automatically has the text come out one letter at a time like it normally would in a video game. I have it so if you hit the dialog button, it'll instantly finish the text so you can skip through it quickly. And then once the little text arrow is visible to tell you to prompt you to hit the button to have the text keep going, when you press the button, it adds 1 to current line. So current line is the text it's pulling from the array, and then calls the function again. So it's calling the function, adding 1 to the current line, So instead of calling 0, comma 0, now it's going to call 0, comma 1. And that brings up the next line. And then when that one's done, it's going to add 1 to current line. That's going to be 0, comma 2. And it's going to hit here. And then you hit it again, it's going to be 0, comma 3. But there is no 0, comma 3. So normally that would be an error, right? Because there'd be nothing to call. But the second line in that function is lines input. And that's where that 2 comes in. So down here at the bottom, it's like if the current line, which is now 3, is greater than number of lines, which we initially set to 2 when we first called that first function, call a new function called dialog end. And dialog end just deletes the text, makes it all go away, and gives control back to the player. So with this system, as long as you have all your text in your array, you can call anything in the array with this function, and it'll go through all of the text boxes and automatically exit out. So you only have to do this once. This one event sheet will work with every cutscene I make in the entire game. Automatically. Pretty fucking lit. But it does more than that, which is pretty cool. Because this is not a 2D array, it's a 3D array. So a 3D array is basically arrays inside arrays. So this is a single 2D array, but it has depth, so you can switch to another array inside of it. So this is another one, has the same dimensions, but it has different values. And these values, up, down, these are the names of animations. The animations for the portrait, the character portrait. So these are just demo versions that I had to make sure this works. But if we go to the portrait right here and I open it up, you can see it has 2 animations, quote unquote, up and down. And so what it has here is there's another piece of logic here. It says every frame set the animation of the portrait to the current scene, current line in the second array. So instead of array 0, it's array 1. And then current scene, current line, again, matches up from here. It's the same values that we were using to control the text. But since instead of being in that first array, now we're in the second one, it just looks at what animation to call and sets the portrait to that. So it can dynamically, with the same information, with the same function, it can dynamically control not just the text that's being called, but it controls the animation that the portrait is playing. But it does more, because if we go into the third array in the 3D array, this has a string value that puts the character name on the text box as well. So right now it's all Akumaru because that's the name of the sword, and he's the only one talking in the demo cutscenes that I've set up so far. But you can change these, and it'll change the text value. So this is a lot of complicated shit that might be hard to follow because I'm not great at explaining it, because it is very complicated. Because I'm dumb. But I believe it's down. Where is it? Trying to see where I actually put that that command to have the text. It is here because I know it works, but whatever. I'll find it later. Let's run it and actually show you what I'm talking about, because that was a long demonstration. So right now I'm just controlling Azumi normally in this little test scene, but these blue boxes are both 2 prompts to start the dialogue function. So this is the first one. You can see it has the character portrait here, it has the name of the character, and it called that first line of text. This is the 0, comma 0. And then it's the little icon here pops up and it's waiting for the key to be hit. When I press the key, it's going to add 1 to that value. Now it's going to call the next line and change the portrait. Hit it again, it's going to call the next line, change the portrait back. And if I hit it again, it's going to be greater than the total amount of lines in this column on the array. It's going to exit. Flawless. Now, if I go over to this one, it's a different text, but it's calling the same functions. I've just put in different values when I call the function as parameters, and it does something different. There you go. Fucking sick. I don't know. This is some baby shit. A dialogue system is not going to impress anybody who knows anything about programming, but the fact that I was able to figure this out completely on my own in an application that's not really designed to be very front-facing with this kind of thing, I'm fucking stoked. I was able to figure it out. So, fuck you. You can't take this from me. there we go. That's what happened this week. Next week, I don't know what I'm going to do yet. We'll figure it out. I'm going to go play video games now because I'm doing all this shit all day. Have a good one. I'll talk to you next week. Hopefully I don't have to record this a third time.